In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Chris tells me it's episode 164. Yes? All right, he's nodding, confirming. We've been going at this program for 3 years now, and it's such a blessing to do so. Sometimes I just lose track of the weeks as we come to you with new content week after week. Last week's episode was a fascinating conversation with myself on testimonies and deconversion when we talked about Marty Sampson and Joshua Harris. Really fascinating episode. Many things to consider, especially for apologists. And online, it continues. We shared an article about Marty Sampson, and it continues to get a lot of comments. This week I had an interesting engagement with a fellow named Garland. And we were talking about atheism and naturalism, evolution. Very fascinating. We heard from David Floyd, one of our longtime atheist followers, and he was chiming in with his views of morality. I think if atheism were true, if naturalism were true, then people would have a hard time getting morality outside of their own minds. Maybe we could come to some collective understanding, but you still can't get outside of the collective mindset. You can't ground morality in the objective world. It's just a bunch of people agreeing that chocolate's their favorite flavor, and there's nothing beyond that for morality. I see our guest today is already thinking deeply about my comments there. Before we jump to that, I do want to mention a couple things. We're talking about Pascal's wager today. It's perhaps one of the most underrated apologetic argument. And if you want to have your voice heard, there's a way you can do that. You can call in. We've got our call lines open. The number to call is 505-2STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. If you're a Christian or not a Christian, we'd love to hear from you. Even some Christians, sadly, don't think this is a good argument, and I think it's a very powerful one for why people should believe in God, and even Christian theism, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point in the discussion. How do we jump from God's existence to Christian theism? So please give us a call. We'd love to have you on our program today. Or if you are listening to this after the fact and you want to leave a message about the program, an episode, or something else, you just got a question about something, we'd love to hear from you. Again, the number is 505-2STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. I do want to make this announcement about our upcoming Defenders Conference. The theme this year is on gospel differences, October 18 and 19. This year it's being held at Christ Church of Oak Brook. We were there 3 years ago for our inaugural Defenders Conference. That showcased Ed Stetzer and Mike Licona, Tim McGrew, and some others. And this year we are excited to have Mike Licona, Craig Keener, and Rob Bowman talking about gospel differences. And we have sort of a lingering announcement, which I will keep lingering, about a fourth speaker, looking to just get a firm reply from that speaker. It should be very exciting. So big announcement forthcoming on that. Please mark your calendar, October 18 and 19, and consider coming from out of state. This is a high quality apologetic event where you can come and go in depth on the issue of gospel differences. And what does that mean for the Gospels with regard to historical reliability or historical unreliability, perhaps? It will be a lot of fun, and I hope that you will join us there. For more information, go to thedefendersconference.com. All right, well, today's program, we're talking about Pascal's wager. Is God worth risking your life, is the way that I phrased it. And I kind of like that question. It sort of encompasses the wager. What it is, who was it by, does it really stand against objections? Joining us on our program today is Jordan Hampton. He's a high school science teacher by day and moonlights as the crash course apologist at Crash Course Apologetics on YouTube. Jordan Hampton, thank you so much for joining us on our program today.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, before we jump into it, let me ask you about Crash Course. Man, say that 5 times fast. I'm familiar with what the Green Brothers have done with Crash Course, a variety of Crash Course videos, and their animated videos there. Tell me about Crash Course Apologetics.
Yeah, those brothers, they produce lots of videos on different subjects, and actually their videos get shown in school a lot. I show their videos. I teach biology and some other things as well. And I really like their videos on biology. What got me thinking about making the YouTube channel was when I would watch their videos on philosophy, I was a little underwhelmed. So they do very good animations. That's one of the ideas I had for my channel, was trying to make it animated and more vibrant colors, and
visually
look
appealing,
attractive.
good graphics.
Yeah, visually appealing. Yeah. But when it came to the content of what they were saying, they tended to critique the old arguments as they were originally expounded, but they don't really address the development since then. And so often their objections that they bring up work. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they work on the old argument, but they don't work at all on the newer version.
So maybe like for the problem of evil, they may have brought in Epicurus and perhaps David Hume, but they haven't integrated Alvin Plantinga's free will defense development from the past 50 years.
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
And it's not just like that one video. If you go and watch their one on, I think it's Aquinas, and in that video they critique the cosmological argument. Well, you had on Josh Rasmussen just a few weeks ago, and the kind of issues the objections they raised to that, just they don't work on Rasmussen's argument. Similarly, they have a video on Pascal's wager. I think it's called like Indiana Jones and Pascal's wager or something like that. And the objections they bring up are just the same old objections that get trotted out again and again and again. And these things have been answered. So I wanted to make a YouTube channel that serves the purpose of kind of being like the Crash Course guys, but just for teaching, instead of biology or philosophy, teaching apologetics.
Yeah, nice. And you've taken the wager and turned it into a multi-series, 4 videos, I think you've turned it into, defending the wager.
There are 4 videos which we'll get into this. There are 4 videos that are specifically about the wager. However, the wager kind of sets the framework for everything else that follows. So the playlist is still going.
Yeah.
I actually will have a video come out tomorrow at 2 Eastern Standard Time. So it's going to be on a version of the fine-tuning argument that uses Bayes' theorem.
Oh, okay. Nice. Very nice. Okay, so we've already talked about the wager, and we've used the term Pascal. Now, before we get into describing what the wager is, tell us who the formulator was and why is he an important figure in the philosophy of religion.
Yeah. Let me say one thing before I say anything about Pascal. I'm still learning on this subject. I'm learning more about Pascal. I'm learning more about the wager. So I'm by no means the expert on the topic. I want to explore it with you, and hopefully if anyone calls in, I'll explore it with you. There may very well be good criticisms of it. I would not be at all shy to say, oh, that's a good criticism if I hear one. It's just as of right now, the objections that are raised usually don't work. So I want to say up front, I'm very humble about this. I won't claim to be the expert on it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that's part of our tagline. We're striving for truth. And so, there are some issues over the years where I've changed my mind on things, and as we learn more things, we learn more about things, we go deeper, we're like, well, wait a minute, maybe that one idea isn't as good as we thought it was not so long ago. So, yeah, that's great. Yeah. All right.
Okay, so Pascal, you asked who he was. He was a 17th century mathematician and physicist. From what I can tell, his father was some kind of accountant, and Pascal helped his father. That's how he got pretty good at adding numbers, doing math. He was pretty much a prodigy when it came to this.
So he was like doing the bookkeeping at 5 years old,
Yeah,
for his
yeah,
dad.
yeah, exactly. And that kind of like mathematical mind really comes out strongly in his wager. But he also was an inventor. So in order to help his dad, he invented the mechanical calculator. And that ended up becoming the precursor to the digital computer. So he's had a big impact just from that invention.
Yeah. So the guy that invented the calculator was a Christian.
Yeah, this very primitive version. I think, from what I can tell, the same way that the odometer in a car works, they built it off the design of Pascal's calculator.
Huh.
But so anyway, the way that this connects to Christianity is Pascal had this. I think at the age of in his 30s, he had this really intense experience, like a religious experience of God. And he was really like radically changed after that. And it was so deep, this experience, that he actually wrote down a note about it, and he kept it in his pocket, in his jacket at all times. After he died, they ended up finding that. But the way that the wager got introduced, once he became a Christian, he began working on this apologetic work. And he had all these notes scribbled, and unfortunately he got sick and died before he was able to finish it. And so after he was dead, his family put together the notes into a book, and it's been titled Pensées, which is the French word for thoughts.
So published posthumously.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and in Pensées, or as the Anglo pronunciation, some people just say Pensies, there's a section there known as the wager. So what is the wager?
Yeah, so it's actually a really, really short section of the Pensées. So they usually will put it in anthologies. So this is like a really good anthology, if you've ever seen this.
Yes, we have some copies here in the office, yeah.
Yeah, I would encourage, if you're into apologetics, get this, because a lot of the ancient writers, some church fathers and modern writers are included in here, but in a section of this, they have the wager, and it's only about 2 pages. So, I mean, it's very, very short. But in that section of the Pensées, Pascal lays out this idea of a coin being flipped. And he says either God is or God is not. And what are you going to wager? And he develops this thought of basically betting your life on one of these alternatives, either God being real or not. And so he argues in the wager, and we'll get into this in a second, but he argues essentially that it's rational to seek a relationship with God and live a deeply Christian life because there is very much to gain and relatively little to lose. That's like a kind of one-sentence summary of his wager.
Yeah. So for the gamblers tuning in, for those that are hitting up the casinos, going to their buddies on a Friday night to play cards, the wager should get their attention, because this is the apologetic argument for the betting man or woman. Now, so the coin flip, coin toss analogy, and I know we'll get more into this, but that sort of assumes a 50-50 split.
Yes. So this is an interesting fact about the wager. By that I mean the section of the Pensées. Some people think that Pascal only gave one wager, but he really gave wagers, plural. If you read it closely, it seems like there's more than one wager that Pascal talks about. One of them talks as if there's this 50-50 chance of God's existence. But later it seems like he tries to make the argument, go up a notch, make it even claim something even bolder, and that is, if there's any chance that God or that the Christian God exists, then you should commit your life to him.
Yeah.
So there are different versions, and we'll talk, but some are stronger than others.
Yeah, so let's just stay at the 50-50 split.
Sure.
Because some people, they get that easier, good sort of building block. So Pascal says, and we extrapolate, if there's a 50-50 split, that God exists, if we believe in God, then what's the consequence or benefit that might result from that? What would be like eternal life, right? Infinite rewards. Whereas if we don't believe in God, well, then we're just going to turn to dust in the end, and it won't really matter. So given those two options, he says, and I'm just sort of painting with broad strokes here, he says we should believe in God because we sort of have nothing to lose. Now, maybe we've got something to lose, like the time spent on Earth here, but who cares if we're just going to become dust?
Right.
And it's a little bit more complex than that, right? So if we believe God exists and God does not exist, then we've lost nothing. If we don't believe God exists and God does not exist, we've also lost nothing. If we don't believe God exists and he does exist, we've lost everything. But if we believe God exists and he does exist, we've gained everything. Have I covered the matrix?
Yes, so you've used an interesting word there. When we say matrix, we're talking about a table that you would draw on a piece of paper with like 2 columns and 2 rows. That's what we mean by matrix.
Yeah.
And in each box is an outcome, and you've described the outcome there. That's what we mean by matrix. But now it's interesting how you put it. You talked about belief, and you talked about losing nothing. So those two ways of framing the argument, I think, are what a lot of people latch onto and criticize. And so I would like to present
some constructive criticism here.
Yeah. I would like to present maybe a version that may not come under criticism so easily.
Okay.
So one of the objections that often gets raised is that you can't say you're like, yeah, it would be great that God exists. That would be a way better alternative than me just turning to dust as soon as I die. That would be better. So there's a criticism, though, that says, okay, even if I thought, yeah, that's better, I can't then force myself to believe in God, because you can't will yourself to believe something.
Pascal addresses that, though, too, doesn't he?
And a lot of people miss that.
Yeah.
So he does address this, and that's why but to just kind of skirt around the problem, like, that doesn't need to hold us down, this talk of belief. I prefer to just talk of commitment. Okay. So even if you don't believe, you don't have this, kind of positive form of the belief in your head, you can commit. And by commit, I just mean things, what Pascal meant was things like pray. Now you may think, how can you pray to a God you don't believe in? Well, you just pray honestly like that. You say, God, if you're there, please give me faith, or at least give me more evidence so that I'll know that I'll come to believe in you. That you can just say a genuine, honest prayer like that. That's an act of commitment. Another way to frame it, if you don't like the word commit, is seek. You don't always know if it's there, but you can seek it. And so you can do things like go to church and develop a circle of friends that are Christians and discuss religious questions with them. All of these are forms of commitment or seeking God that don't actually require you to believe that God exists. This is kind of like the beginning of the journey for you. And that's all that the wager sets out to do, is to try and get people to initiate this process of searching for God.
Yeah.
You may not know if he's there, you may not believe he's there, but you'll seek him and search for him.
So the wager itself is not an argument for God's existence.
Yes, and that's another big. I didn't mean to cut you off. That's another big misunderstanding. Even I've heard Douglas I think
Grotice,
yeah. Critique this book in that they put the wager in the section on arguments for God. And so the wager is not an argument for God, because the conclusion of the argument is not, therefore God exists.
Right.
That's how a lot of other arguments work. This argument, that the wager just says, or the conclusion of the wager is, therefore you should seek God. That's very different. And so it's helpful to keep that in mind. I think that's a big misunderstanding with the wager. And another big misunderstanding with the wager is exactly who the audience of it is. And this may lead us back into that 50-50 situation. The wager isn't really intended for someone that thinks that, God certainly does not exist. And it isn't intended for someone who thinks God certainly exists. It's for those people that, fall in between there. If you have any doubt, or you just say, I could be wrong, I'm not 100% certain, then the wager is targeted more for those people. And then certain versions of the wager appeal to, the people in that group. Like, is it going to appeal just to agnostics, kind of, I'm roughly 50-50, or is it going to appeal to people that think, I give the chance that God exists a 1% chance?
Yeah, and even that 1%ers, as we'll get into, Pascal says, yeah, you should still believe.
Yeah, and in one of the, like I said, in one of the versions, it sounds like he's saying you should believe, and in other versions with the 50-50, it sounds like it's a different situation. So we got different styles of the argument.
Yes. Leighton Flowers is tuning in. He says, I'm glad Jordan wore a headset, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to tell you two apart. This is a special episode of Veracity here with bearded and balded men. We should get Christian, our graphic designer, on call here, because he's one of us.
Hurt said he's going to have me be his stunt double in forthcoming videos.
Yeah, right. Leighton, thanks for tuning in. Glad you're watching. Okay, so Jordan, let's jump further and deeper into the argument here.
Yeah, let me try to formalize the argument a little, just so we know where exactly we're at. So I am basing a lot of what I'm saying right now off of this book by Dr. Michael Rhoda called Taking Pascal's Wager. And so he kind of updates the argument. As I was mentioning earlier, it seems like the Crash Course guys critiqued the older form, but it's been updated a lot, Pascal's Wager, and so I'm basing it off of these updates. So here's kind of an updated version of Pascal's Wager. It's got 3 steps to it. Okay, it goes premise, conclusion. So premise 1 is, if Christianity has at least a 50% chance of being true, then it is rational to commit to a Christian life. Premise 2, Christianity does have at least a 50% chance of being true. And then the conclusion is, therefore, it is rational to commit to living a Christian life. Now, the wager is really premise 1. It's saying, if Christianity has a 50% chance of being true, then you should commit your life to Christianity. That's where the wager comes in. Premise 2 is where natural theology and specifically Christian evidence comes in. So you can trot out arguments for God in support of premise 2, and you can bring in the case for the resurrection and other evidences specific to Christianity in premise 2. And from that, it follows it's rational to commit to living a Christian life.
This is interesting. It's a logically valid argument, modus ponens. if I've heard correctly. If P then Q, P therefore Q.
Yes.
Now, premises, the way they work in deductive formats, it's that one should be willing to affirm a premise if the premise is more likely to be true than not, which itself is a probabilistic...
Is a 50%
That's
or
right.
higher.
So you just have to be 50%, or rather 50.1% certain that Christianity is 50.1%, which is basically like, sort of, in a sense, lowers the bar.
Yes.
That one would consider. So you don't even have to be 100% certain that Christianity is 50% likely. You're laughing. I don't know. Maybe someone hasn't made this remark before about the argument.
No, you're right, and it's just a funny way to think about it. That if I say, if it's 50% true, or if there's a 50% chance that it's true, and you're like, is that statement that Jordan just made more likely true or not? I'm kind of like roughly 50 about it. Then you should accept.
That's right. So
and move on.
You only have to be 50% certain that it's 50% true, right? For someone to affirm the premise. Now, okay, granted, but the wager is P1, right? So that's mainly what the wager's about.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I've put it in the context of a more full blown argument for why you should commit your life to Christ.
Right.
But you're right. The wager's just premise one. And so everything I say today, maybe that's a good way to think about it, Kurt. Everything I say today, by the end, think to yourself, is what he just said more likely true or not? And even if you're, almost 50-50 split, then you're probably going to accept premise one and the argument goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So that's sort of the formal and updated formalizing of the wager and a fuller argument based on the wager. But maybe we can get more into it because I could think of numerous objections to, if I the way I learned it in undergrad was, you've got the life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or not. Why not take the life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll?
Yeah, I don't want to caricature it. So let me do this. I'm going to offer two analogies. One of them is not mathematical at all, and then the other one's a little more mathematical, but still, I think, fairly easy to grasp. And in both analogies, I'm going to ask you, Kurt, so be prepared. But also those listening, I'm going to ask you, what would you do in this situation? Okay? So here we go. And the first analogy, this is not mathematical at all. Imagine that you're walking down a street, and as you pass a fence that is covered by a lot of trees and brush, you can kind of see through the fence and see through the brush, and you see what looks like a child face down in a swimming pool. And you think, I think this child might be drowning. I can't tell if it's one of those blow up dolls or if it's actually a child, but I can't quite tell. But it really does look to me like it might be a child drowning. So say you get a little closer, then you start trying to search it out a little bit more, and there's a lock on that fence. Okay, and you think, I really can't tell. It could go either way. This might be a child drowning, or it might not. I'm kind of 50-50. Okay, what would you do, Kurt?
You wanna check to see that it's a child, and if it's drowning him, you jump in and save the kid. Yeah.
So you would be crazy to just be like, I'll just walk on down the street. You would want. It feels like you have a moral obligation.
Yeah.
To actually check it out and be sure about it. To seek for it. And even if you have to break the lock, okay, that's a cost to you. Say you end up being mistaken, and the owner of the house gets mad and yells at you and says, you have to repay me for that lock. You might say, it's worth the cost because what's at stake is worth so much. And it might very well be the case that the wager takes a similar form where we might have a moral obligation to check out and see if what the evidence really shows about God, if he's real, if Christianity's true, and even if there's a cost to it, what is at stake is of such a high value that we've got to check it out. That's one analogy for the wager. And another one, this is a mathematical one. And the reason I give a mathematical one is because this is the route Pascal takes, a more mathematical approach. Say that we're betting here. Okay, you put that picture up on Facebook of the chips being flipped. So say we're betting here, and we're playing a game of chance with a coin. Okay, and I'm going to flip a coin, and you have to call what's going to happen. Okay, so when I flip the coin, you have to call whether it's heads or tails. Say that you say it's heads. So you call heads, and what do you know? It turns up it's heads. You won $100. Okay, if you call heads and it lands heads, you'll win $100. Now, if you call heads and it lands tails, then you'll lose $1. Now, say the opposite happens. You call tails and it lands heads. You'll lose $100. Say you call tails and it ends up being tails. You'll win $1. Now, Kurt, what would you choose? What would you call if I flipped that coin?
Well, you're gonna call heads and try to get the hundo as
Okay. So what you just told me is that you would commit to God, because in this analogy, calling heads is like committing to God. Calling tails is like not committing to God. In the case where you call tails, you don't commit to God, and it turns out there is no God. That's like winning $1. There's a reward there, like maybe you got certain pleasures in this life, but it just pales in comparison to the $100 of eternity, and not just eternity, but and this is something we can get into here in a second, but like truly incomprehensible goods. Both God himself. I think many people fail to realize that God in himself is the greatest good that you can possibly ever have. But you take that reward and it just completely dwarfs the goods that you might get in an 80-year span of popularity and money.
This all sounds well and good, Jordan. I could think of a few objections here, though, to the analogies, and we've got to take a break here. When we come after the break, though, we'll first start with the drowning kid analogy. I think I've got a successful objection there.
Okay.
So we'll see if I can try that out and see how that goes. All right, so stick with us through this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Let's say there's this Christian apologist. You love their message, but have trouble finding their videos, their articles, or social media posts. How do you stay connected to them? We're on it. Defenders Media uses the tools of the digital age to create content for your favorite apologists. We give them more screen time, more digital soapboxes, and more presence to deliver more of the content that you love. That's what we do.
I know that social media is important to those of you who follow my work. Many respond to my videos and posts on Facebook and Twitter, but it becomes impossible after a while to keep up with it all and to continue with research. That's why I'm thrilled that we have found a solution, Defenders Media.
Whether it's a website, whether it's printed material, whether it's a question on graphics, I cannot do what I do and reach my audience without the help of Defenders Media. They have been integral in helping me to reach my audience.
Defenders Media ensures consistent content reaches your hand from today's leading apologists and apologetic ministries, like Mike Lycona, Apologetics 315, the Veracity Hill podcast with Kurt Jarris, and more.
To learn more, text the word Defenders to 555-888, and we'll send you a free PDF of the top 5 ways to share the gospel online. Thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. If you'd like to learn how you can become a sponsor, you can go to our website, veracityhill.com, click on that patron tab, and we are so close to having our new website up and running. It's going to be a stellar, great-looking facelift. The first time I made the website was 3 years ago, and so it needs a little updating to the design. Of course, all the content will be there, and everything else, all the functionality will be there as well, so stay tuned for that. Also, let me say this. If you are a longtime listener of the program, would you consider becoming one of our monthly supporters? Those are patrons, folks that just chip in a few bucks each month. Also, give us a review on Facebook, iTunes, or the Google Play Store, wherever you listen to this program. Reviews are a great way of having new people who come across our program learn about what other people think, and we'd love to get your support through those reviews. On our show today, we're talking about Pascal's wager, or the wager, as some call it. It's perhaps one of the most underrated arguments for seeking God. Notice the distinction there if you were tuning into the first half of the program. I'm joined today by Jordan Hampton. He's a high school science teacher by day and moonlights as the apologist at Crash Course Apologetics on YouTube. And Jordan and I have been talking about the wager. He gave 2 analogies for the wager in the first half of the program. He talked about a drowning baby, or perhaps if we waged $100 versus $1 in a coin flip. And I've thought of maybe some objections to this. But now, Jordan, before we get to those objections, we do a segment on the program called Rapid Questions. And this is where I'm going to, it's a 60-second segment, and you're giving me the death stare like I've never told you about this, but that's the idea. I
don't like Dr. Pepper. You can skip that question.
Oh, he has listened to Rapid Questions. Okay, well, he's already answered that one, and Chris, can you drop the call now?
Sprite is where it's at.
Sorry, what was your preferred drink there?
Sprite, by a long shot.
Sprite?
Yes.
Who drinks Sprite?
It just is so crisp, and yeah.
He does.
Mark says he does. All right, so I'll start the game clock here, and we'll maybe I'll try to ask you some other questions then. Mark gave me some updated versions, so we'll see what we've got here. So are you ready, Jordan?
Yeah, I'll give it my best shot.
Okay, here we go. KFC or Taco Bell?
Taco Bell.
Have you ever driven on the other side of the road?
No.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Water on the bathroom floor after a shower. Gets on my nerves.
What movie makes you cry every time you see it?
Probably Passion of the Christ.
What's your favorite superhero?
Batman, for sure.
What occupation would you never attempt?
Maybe like the CEO of something.
What's your favorite food at Thanksgiving?
Turkey.
Pick a fictional character you'd like to meet.
Either Sherlock Holmes. Let's go with Sherlock Holmes. I always liked him.
If you had to sing karaoke, what song would you pick? Karaoke song.
I don't know. I don't know.
Not much of a karaoke guy, huh?
No.
And turkey, that's a solid nap time food at Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I was between my mom's broccoli cheddar casserole. That's like so good. But I do like the turkey, especially the dark meat.
Oh, dark meat. Yeah, that's the way to go.
It's juicier. Yeah.
Does it have more tryptophan? Tryptophan? What's tryptophan?
Yeah, I think it does actually. I think the dark meat has more tryptophan. It's an amino acid.
Yeah. Amino acid. What a high school biology term. Okay, the wager. Here we go. Let's start with the drowning kid, okay? And who knows? Maybe this is something to think about. Okay, if I'm a guy that's walking down the street, maybe I stop. But what if you are the president of the United States and you have a meeting with the Russian ambassador? Mm-hmm. So maybe you see a drowning kid there, but you have an important meeting to get to. Mm-hmm. Is it worth your time to stop? And maybe this would be analogous for other average Joes, like maybe it's just not worth their time. Maybe they value the life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll more so than saving a human being. So maybe it's just for those of us who already value human beings.
Yeah. Well, I guess, so anytime that a critique of an analogy is given, I'm trying to think of what that your analogy is supposed to match up with.
So
it just seems to me like if all it is a meeting, especially if it could be postponed, I don't know, that just seems to me like you would definitely save the drowning baby, like no questions asked. Now, if you made it like a really harder scenario, like
the Russian ambassador, like if we screw up the meeting with the Russian ambassador,
then they'll launch a nuclear warhead or something like
exactly.
That.
Yeah. So there's some.
Yeah. Then you have to start thinking like a consequentialist, and that's a hard that you're probably familiar with the trolley problem and like giving up one life to save more lives and things like that. So I mean I don't know that's like a critique of the wager necessarily, so much as a critique of like where you stand on consequentialism.
Right.
But,
and so as I said, sort of the analogy here would be like someone valuing the life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll a heck of a lot more than valuing the life of commitment to God. Right? Maybe that's where the analogy is. So if I'm saying there's this more important meeting, then someone's just valuing their earthly life and what they'll get out of it more so than the outcome.
Okay. Yeah, now that I can address. Okay, I see that. Maybe I just misunderstood the first part. I think that so I would just like to have a conversation with that person and ask some questions. I think that when people think of what it will be like to be with God, I think a lot of times they have a really not unbiblical and also just under imaginative idea of what heaven will be like and what it will be like to be with God. If you, to me, like I was saying a few minutes ago, God is the greatest person that, or the greatest being that you could ever fathom, and there's no one more loving. Like I feel like people, especially in this culture, can really grasp onto the idea of love, and like it seems like love is incredibly valued and championed. Like that's something to be fought for and desired. And there's no greater being that loves you more deeply than God himself, at least if the Christian God is real. And then you add to that, he is the most adventurous person you'll ever know. He's the funniest person that he's the kind of person you just their personality would attract you to, you know what I mean? And it would kind of be like, to me, if somebody said the things of this world are just going to be better in the end than anything that God could offer me, either in himself or in heaven. That just lacks imagination. I think that the best art, the best music, the best movies, the best literature, everything that you probably like here is just going to be completely swamped by the beauty and the culture in heaven. So like the best art, the best music, the best literature, all that's going to be not here, but in heaven. Why would you give that up for this? So I think that maybe the idea is it would have to be that this person thinks the stuff that I can have in this life is better than what I could ever have with God in heaven. And that just lacks imagination.
Yeah, so to the analogy then, I guess maybe the response is you don't have a meeting with the Russian ambassador, and even if you did, the situation across the fence is of much greater value. So maybe that's where the analogy...
Essentially my maneuver, I don't know exactly how to modify the analogy, but essentially my maneuver is, if we're taking it to the wager, why do you think that this life is going to be of greater value than, or the things you would have in this life is going to be of greater value than God himself and relationship with him for eternity in heaven?
Yeah, good.
It seems like whatever they say is going to, at some point, lack imagination and just not be biblical.
Yeah. I just want to note here, Kyle's got a good question. We'll get to that towards the end of today's discussion about getting to the Christian God.
Sure.
But the coin flip, okay, the betting the $100 versus the $1. Yeah, of course you're going to bet on the $100 every time. But that assumes 50-50 split here. What if you had a wager? What if you were playing the roulette table where it's not just 50-50? Maybe you place your bets on the small $1 options instead of the $100 one, which is so to bring it to the wager. Let's say there's not a 50-50 chance. Let's say there's a 2% chance that God exists. So
yeah, in that case, right now where I stand on this is I think that I only adopt the 50-50 version of Pascal's wager, and I'm not yet. I think I see problems with the 2% version, like you mentioned, and so the person that thinks there's only a 2% chance that God exists, then I would say, okay, Pascal's wager doesn't apply to you. Like, you're not my target audience with the wager.
Really? Okay, so that's, well, sure, maybe not target audience, but even then, I would still argue with that person, and I'd say even if there's 2%, you should still commit to God.
My hesitation for that is that
we're dealing with a type of person where it's not just the intellectual. They're not just basing it on probability. There's something else going on there.
Well, no, I'm just sticking with the probability. So go back to my coin flipping analogy. So the thing is that's assumed is it's a fair coin that's being flipped.
Yeah.
So it's 50-50. So if you came to believe that, or at least you thought you had good reason to believe that the coin that was being flipped wasn't fair and it was rigged to land on tails.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know maybe even rigged coins can have this rare, it turns up the other one, but so there's a very small probability that it will turn up heads, but it's rigged to turn tails. So in that case, earlier you told me I would pick heads. You probably wouldn't pick heads if you knew the coin was rigged to be tails, right?
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't. So I would say, even if I would rather win the dollar by saying tails than to say heads and know that I'm going to lose $100.
Yeah.
If it's rigged. So that's one reason that I don't favor the stronger form of Pascal's wager that says any non-zero probability is all it takes to get you to take the wager. I would rather stick with it needs to be roughly 50-50.
Well, what about 60-40?
I've thought about this, and like I don't have a good answer for where's that cutoff.
Right.
That's why I say roughly 50-50, and I really don't have a good answer for, if you're 60-40, or say you got a 40, you think there's a 40% chance that God exists. I don't know. It's like a hard cutoff. You can do the math. I won't get into that, but this whole wager is based on something that's completely religiously neutral. It's just a theorem in math or probability probability theory called decision theory. And it's really straightforward. I've done it in the videos on my YouTube channel, the way that you work out these probabilities. So you make a matrix, you put the probabilities on them that you think, and see what the math shows.
Yeah.
The idea is that, and this has a few exceptions, but most of the time you're going to pick the thing with the greatest expected value.
Yeah.
When you do the math, whatever comes out with the greatest expected value, pretty much most of the time that's what you're going to pick. There are certain paradoxes, but that usually goes with a lot of things.
Sure, yeah. Good. Okay, we've got just about 10 minutes here. I've got Kyle's question, but before we get to that, I want to ask you about maybe one objection to the wager that people might embrace the commitment to God out of selfish reasons. Say, stay out of hell free card. Or maybe religion is just a crutch for them, so it's a bit more convenient for them to accept the wager. What would you say to something like that?
You don't have to take the wager for those reasons. That would be my first response. So
I feel like the way Chris, I feel like the way Jordan just said that was like, we're in the Matrix, and oh come on, Lawrence Fishburne's character, Morpheus. Thank you. It's been so long since I've seen that. I feel like the way he just phrased it was like Morpheus. You don't have to take the wager.
He's bald too.
Well, you don't have. I'm still saying take the wager. I'm just saying you don't have to take it for those
reasons. Right. Yeah. Sorry.
So, that would be my first response. So notice when I was trying to elaborate on this outcome where God exists and you've committed to him, and you're wondering, well, what's the value of that? And you were saying maybe somebody would have, a greater value over here. When I pitched that outcome to you, I was saying God is the greatest good. Like, I'm not saying you want heaven and you don't really care if God's there or not. I'm saying, no, God is what's he's better than anything you could ever imagine. And him and himself. Everything else, like the people with him, that's great too. And, we'll be healed and all that's great. But God himself is the greatest good. And so you can seek the wager to please him, to be in relationship with him, because you want the greatest good, which is him in himself. Now, I think this, people do all the time commit their life to Christ out of fear of hell. And I don't think that's healthy to stay there. But, for example, the prodigal son, if you read that parable, what initiated this process of the prodigal going back was he said, I'm hungry. I want food. And the father welcomed him back with open arms. So I think just from that parable alone, God is welcoming whatever motivated you to come to him. But I think he doesn't want us to stay there. It's not like the son just said, I only came back for the food. Like, you see this change of heart over time. And so I think even if you take the wager initially for selfish reasons, that's not a problem. But let's not stay there. Let's actually cultivate a genuine love for God.
Yeah, and maybe we can be honest too here. The person who is skeptical of the wager says, well, maybe you shouldn't take it because it's out of selfish motive. But what if they take the blue pill? Am I using the Matrix analogy right here? Yes. Okay. What if they take the blue pill? They're taking it out of selfish self-interest, self-motivation, the life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So it's not like one position is trying to be holier than thou.
Right.
Both people are doing it out of self-motivation, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that that's a good point, and we're always going to act in our self-interest. I say always. Like, most of the time, we're going to act in our self-interest. Even if you think, like, I'm going to sacrifice something for someone else, like, the reason you do that is because you want to be a morally good person. Like, you want something to be the case for you. Like, I'm a morally praiseworthy individual.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? So even that is a kind of like something that's in the interest of yourself. Like, you want to develop a good character.
Yeah.
So, and if you think about it, even Jesus's command to love your neighbor as yourself assumes that you love yourself. It wouldn't be a good command if you hated yourself.
Right.
So everyone's got this kind of natural interest in taking care of themselves. That's why you brush your teeth. You want to take care of yourself.
Well, some
But
people
that's not
don't, I guess. No, but that's fair. Right. And so it's, if we're all in this together, there's no one side. I mean, everyone's doing it for the sort of self-interest line.
Yeah.
All right, now we've only got a few minutes left. I want to take Kyle's question here. Oh, and he's got another objection.
Okay.
Kyle, thanks for watching.
Thank you, Kyle.
Let's take the first one. He says, thoughts on this objection. The premise says Christian God. Most arguments for God are for general God that allows for Christian God in others. Is it possible to show a specifically Christian God with over 50% confidence?
Why do we need over 50%?
Well, maybe 50.1 or...
Okay, yeah. So I would say, no, I don't even think we need 50.1. I just think we need roughly 50.
Okay.
That's all I need for premise 2, because that's all it takes. But okay, so how do you get to the Christian God? This is actually, I'll tie this in. This is one of the big objections in the academic literature to Pascal's wager. It's called the many gods objection, and it's essentially, look, you've got all these religions that claim like eternal life and eternal misery and things like that. Take Islam for just as one example, a version of Islam.
Eternal misery, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So take Islam, or a specific version of Islam that says Christians will suffer the fate of eternal misery. Okay. So if you put that into the wager, it looks like it would be a really bad idea to be a Christian because you run the risk of eternal misery. The answer, though, to the many gods objections is actually pretty straightforward. The many gods objection doesn't at all touch the what I call the basic argument, and that is that any religion, well, I'll preface that, a lot of religions are going to be better than no religion at all. So if you choose not to commit at all, that's going to be equal to, if you lay out the decision matrix, and I do this in my video called Answering the Top 5 Objections. I lay out the matrix and show you. But if you don't commit at all, it's going to be equally bad as the fate of a Christian on if Islam is true. You both suffer eternal misery. If you don't commit at all, or if you're a Christian and Islam turns out to be true, you both suffer eternal misery. So the point is, Pascal's wager doesn't offer any way to decide between religions. It just tries to say you should commit to a religion.
Yeah, so it just, to ask that question would go beyond the scope of
the wager.
Of the wager,
but
right.
That's why I gave that original, that premise conclusion argument, because the second premise then is to show that the Christian God is the most likely one. So the point is, you say, okay, if I think there's a 50% chance that the Christian God exists, or even just God exists, if you want, start there, then you're going to pick a religion. And the thing is, you just pick the one that seems to have the most evidence going for it. And I would, in premise 2, I would argue Christianity is the one that has the most evidence going for it.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't, and again, it doesn't have to get you to 80%, 90%. It just needs to get you to 50%.
And you just have to be 50% certain that it gets you to 50%.
You just have to be 50% certain about what I just said, that this kind of argument that committing to a religion is going to be a equally good or even better alternative than not committing. And in the language of decision theory, we call that weakly dominating, a weakly dominant strategy. I unpack all this in that video.
You teach science, not math, in high school?
Right, I don't teach math.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a similar mindset, though, the sort of the engineering mind, knowing how things work, and so people who.
But I would. What was that guy's name? Kyle.
Yes, Kyle.
Kyle. I would encourage you to check out my video called "Answering the Top 5 Objections to Pascal's Wager." I give 5 objections, and it's the 5th one. I think the one that you're asking about.
Very nice. Jordan, we've run out of time for our program today. Great to discuss with you, to go through the wager. First time we've done it on our program here, over 3 years. And I think it's an underrated argument. Some Christians, they don't think it's too persuasive, but I like some of the nuances that have been made here. It's not an argument for God, but it's an argument to seek or commit to God.
Yeah.
And in light of that, it's a stellar argument.
Yeah.
Definitely a greater expected outcome, if I'm using the probability theory terminology correctly, than the life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so for that reason alone, people should pursue God and take those steps. Basically, Pascal says if you're having trouble believing, go start acting out the Christian life. Or as I might say, fake it till you make it. I
don't like saying fake it till you make it, but...
Oh, man, that's how I've made a living, fake it till you make it. I'm just pretending to be a podcast host here.
No, I know we're out of time, so I'll plug a couple things if you'll let me.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
So Pascal had this interesting thought of there's good evidence for God, but we fail to see it because of our sin. And so his goal with the wager was, if I can move the person to be more receptive to God, then his grace will help them come to see that the evidence is stronger, and they'll commit. And so that's what I like most about this argument, is unlike other arguments that are for God, you just end up with God exists, and it's kind of like, yeah, I can intellectually consent to that, but I don't do anything. Pascal's wager says, no, I'm moving you to action, not just intellectual consent.
Yeah.
And you're going to go to church, and you're going to pray, and you're going to seek God and discuss these religious questions. So I have lots more content than Pascal's wager planned for my YouTube channel. Please go check it out. Subscribe. It's called Crash Course Apologetics. And like I said, I'll have a new video coming out tomorrow at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. And stay on the line here. I want to chat with you after I sign off here. All right, well, that does it for our program today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons and the partnerships that we have with our sponsors. And they are Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, and Fox Restoration. I want to thank our technical team today, specifically our technical producer, Chris, and for Mark for sitting in here, our associate producer. I want to thank our guest, Jordan Hampton, and last but not least, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.